Welcome to the first Friday episode of Football Friday. No, let me try that again. Welcome to the first episode of Football Friday here on the Social Spreader. We've got a lot of things to go over here today. Generally, what I do is I wait until Friday to make all of my picks. One, it's very crucial for the over-unders. If there's any kind of a weather system or if there's anything that's going to be happening from a environment standpoint, you want to make sure that you are as prepared and as up to speed as you possibly can be. I understand that we here are trying to predict the future. Weathermen and weatherwomen and whatnot have been trying to predict the future for a very long time, and whether or not they've had success is completely your call. I've always said the easiest job in the world is to be a meteorologist, quote unquote, in Arizona. Let me take a look. I think it's going to be sunny here, Bob. Looks like a 0% chance of rain. Might get a couple wind. You know, that wind. We might get some wind, but other than that, yeah, sunny and 100. Back to you. I'm also going to give out some picks here today. I've been getting asked. I'm going to do I think from now on every Friday I'm going to do a 6-pack, which means according to what's happened this year, I'll give you 3 winners, 4, 5 if we're lucky. And now watch me go either 0-6 or 6-0. This is why it's so much fun, because you never really know. But before we do that, I'd like to unveil a segment that I like to call Weekly Reflections, where I kind of pull things from the news over the last week, and we kind of get a very good, well-rounded idea of what happened this week. As I've always said, as much as I love to talk about the spreads and sports and trying to pick winners and trying to help, as I said before, with the proliferation of sports gambling and where it's headed and how much more legalized it's becoming in this country, I want to be a resource for people. I want people to trash or treasure. If you like how I take a look at games and how I analyze them, that I've been doing now for 18 years, cool. I hope I can help you. I'm still working on trying to figure out how to sell my picks. I would like to be more lucrative from that perspective. But when you're at self-proclaimed 51%, up a whopping 1 unit after 10 weeks, it's really hard because every sports wagering fan wants to pick winners every single weekend. Just like I'm sure the 93% of the tickets that were on the Ravens last night, they thought that they had a winner. Why would you pick Miami? Because football. Because sports. Sports is the only reality television on earth. I don't care what anyone else says. It's the only reality television. You literally do not know what's going to happen next. I put it up on my Instagram page that listen, I'm going into this Friday 2-0. I am up 2 units for the first time in a long time this year. And I don't try to gloat, but whenever you do have a good start, it's always good to let that momentum kind of roll. And I had Pitt to cover 6.5. And I'm so glad that the torrential rain in Pittsburgh decided to wait until North Carolina got the ball in overtime. That was one of the more interesting things that I had ever seen. And I kind of felt like I had the Miami game at +9 kind of in the bag. Usually people, and this is something that's very good information, if you're thinking about going on the underdog, wait until closer to kickoff, because there's always going to be favorite money coming in. It's going to drive up any line that you have. I was able to get Miami at 9. I liked them at 8, but I figured because of the Ravens, because of what they've been doing, because of Lamar Jackson, that more favorite money would show up prior to kickoff. Moved it up to 9. I jumped all over it. But before that, let's do the weekly reflections here. And I just want to make sure that I've got all of my facts here straight. So, Patrick Matthews and Brian Lemley are 2 white supremacists that were arrested this week for planning an incredibly detailed mass shooting against the African American community. From what I've read, they are each here illegally from Canada, and they were sentenced to 9 years. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure there's some African American people who are serving life sentences in this country for marijuana. Earlier in the week, Ted Cruz talked about Texas seceding from the union and wants Joe Rogan to be the president. Please go and take everybody who agrees with Texas with you. We don't need you. A Republican from Arizona, Paul Gosser, created an anime video showing him and his constituents killing Democrats, and he won't face any penalties because America. Kyle Rittenhouse makes an absolute fool of himself, not crying while crying, but not crying, on the witness stand, saying that his life was in danger while he was carrying an illegal AR-15 across the state line of of Illinois and Wisconsin. The judge, Bruce Schroeder, who's obviously a racist white supremacist who is not interested in justice whatsoever, is only proving the point of the two judicial systems in this fucking country. To illustrate that point, of the 11 jurors in the murder case of Ahmaud Arbery, one of them is black, but it's a jury of his peers. Not to mention the DA on the case, who is, again, an obvious racist white supremacist, made an impromptu speech about not letting black pastors into a public courtroom. It is public. And this was all after the judge warned that there were going to be some kind of biases on the case. And then a white girl in Prior Lake, Minnesota, 30 minutes away from where George Floyd was murdered and pretty damn close to where I was raised, puts an extremely racist video out on social media, and the school let kids out over the fear of large protests because she was bullying an African American, she may have been indigenous or Native American, either way, a non-Caucasian girl who was fighting with depression, telling her to cut herself deeper next time, and then using the N-word. Meanwhile, in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, an 8-year-old was killed by police after police heard gunshots miles away. They decided to just fire recklessly, killed an 8-year-old, and now the district attorney is charging 2 African-American teens with her murder. Meanwhile, Aaron Rodgers gets a $14,000 fine and is eligible to play. CeeDee Lamb gets a $20,000 fine for a uniform violation, and Colin Kaepernick is still unemployed. What in the fucking hell is going on here? And speaking of hell, Ralph Shorty. Let's do some lines. So, the 6-pack that I'm going to be giving you guys here today, all college ball. We're going to do college football. I'm going to analyze 6 games, and I'm going to tell you what I think. But before we do that, real quick, I just want to make sure that everybody is aware of this. This is currently where we stand, roughly midway through the season. I know I touched on it earlier this week, but let's take a look at what teams are currently the best ROI, return on investment. You ready? Because I'm sure all of you, quote-unquote smart sports fans had this, okay? Bowling Green University, 7-2 against the spread. The Louisiana Lafayette Ragin' Cajuns, 8-1 to the under. If you were to bet against Missouri in every single game, you are 8-1 against the spread. If you were to bet against Southern Mississippi in every single game, you are 8-1 against the spread. If you bet against Clemson in every single game, you are 7-2 against the spread. If you bet against Kansas in every game, you are 7-1 against the spread. If you take Oklahoma State in every single game, you are 7-2 against the spread. That is after learning that right now the hottest team in the country against the spread are the Pirates of East Carolina. Did you know that New Mexico State is more lucrative currently than Alabama. Syracuse is an ATM at 8-1 against the spread. The Roadrunners from Texas San Antonio are an ATM at 8-1 against the spread. As I said before, what the hell is going on here? And speaking of hell, Tim Nolan, let's do some lines. All the information, as I've said before, is brought to you by OddsShark. They are the greatest resource for information on this topic that I have found on the internet. And so let's take a look at the first game here. Georgia State at Coastal Carolina. I know what you're saying. Coastal Carolina has been a juggernaut. They're 18-2 straight up in their last 20 games. They are 9-3-1 against the spread in their last 13 against teams in the Fun Belt. However, McCall is going to be out. The reason why Coastal was so good, in my opinion, is because of him. Now, they are still catching 10.5 points at home against Georgia State. I know what you're saying. Who the hell is Georgia State? Georgia State is a team that's 6-3 against the spread, and the last 3 times that these two teams have played, Coastal's 1-2. It's at the under. It's at the under twice, and Georgia State has gotten the ball moving on them. As of right now, Georgia State, a fun fact, is also 4-1 against the spread on the road. They are road warriors. My lean, because my fades and my leans, I lean towards Georgia State heavily on this one. This is the first time Coastal has had a matchup without McCall under center. I think that means something. I'm taking Georgia State. The next game is Texas A&M at Ole Miss. Look, at the end of the day, Texas A&M on each line, offensive line and defensive line, has a massive advantage. The last 3 times these two teams have played, A&M is 3-0 straight up, 3-0 against the spread, and they've hit the under every single time. Why is that important? Because each team right now, A&M and Ole Miss, are 3-6 to the under. That's a big deal, because I do think that this is going to be more of a defensive game than a lot of people who watch Ole Miss are used to seeing. I'm leaning Texas A&M. I would also sprinkle some lunch money on the under as well. Maybe just Happy Meal money. Your call. But I think that the reason why A&M is 3-0 straight up and against the spread against these guys the last 3 is because in the trenches they're just superior. And I do think Texas A&M has one of the more underrated defensive units in the country. I'm going with the Aggies. The next game is an interesting one. It's Washington State at Oregon. Now, I know that this is going to come as a huge shock to people, because over the years, Autzen, which is the home field for Oregon, has been a juggernaut. They rarely lose, and they always cover. This year, against the spread at home, Oregon's 0-5. They're 5-0. They win, but they don't cover. And Oregon, as a double-digit favorite, because they're catching 14 right now, they are historically bad. And take a look at this. The last 10 times that these two teams have played, Washington State has covered 9. And they're getting 14 points against a team that, in my opinion, in Oregon, that is kind of looking ahead. It's always interesting. It's always a very subjective thing when you call something a look-ahead game, because you don't necessarily really know. But next week, Oregon goes to Utah, and that is a huge game because Utah has been crushing people. They've been killing people lately. And I think that this is a very good spot for Wazoo. They've had 2 weeks off. They are coming off a win against Arizona State. They're also coming off a loss to BYU by 2. We just saw BYU drop 70 on Virginia. I think Wazoo at plus 14 is a very good lean. I also know that Washington State is 6-0 against the spread in their last 6 games. So I am fully corrected. The other second hottest team in the country right now, aside from the Pirates of East Carolina, are the Cougars from Washington State. They're 6-0 against the spread in their last 6. Keep riding it. Let's go Wazoo. The next game is purely a hunch. Purely a hunch. Because as I said earlier, going against Clemson all year has been extremely lucrative. You would be 7-2 right now against the spread. But it would shock the hell out of me if UConn scores a touchdown. Whatever you want to say about Clemson, the defense has remained. They're still very good. They almost beat Georgia. Let that one sink in. After everything that we've seen, they kept up with Georgia. No one else has, and that's because of the defense. I think the offense and Dabo are pissed. I think they're sick and tired of this shit, and this is the game where they drop 60. 62-6 has a nice ring to it, and the line is 41. I don't normally do this because right now 72% of the money is on UConn, and for good reason. That is a massive amount of points for a team that can't score. But this is a mismatch in class. This is a mismatch in athletes. This is a mismatch all over the field. UConn is 1-8. They're not good. The only win, I believe, was against UMass. Clemson, this is the game where they get every frustration out from the season. Every frustration they've had during the season, this is the game that they get it out. Give me 62-6. Right now, the over-under is 52. I think Clemson might score that, as I said before, as I just said. I think they might score that on their own. I don't normally lay with these points, but I'm going to do it simply off a hunch. The next one, as I said before, if you bet against the Kansas Jayhawks, you'd be 7-1-1 against the spread. Let's keep that going. Texas scored 70 at some point here this year. In fact, let me make sure of that because I would really hate to say that and then be wrong. They beat Texas Tech 70-35. Now, granted, they're on a 4-game skid, but no 4-game skid has ever been happier than to see Kansas on the schedule. And so I like Texas, and I like Texas huge. I think that they are going to be a little bit angry. I also know that KU on the road is 0-3-1 against the spread, and Texas is 3-1 against the spread. They actually do very well at home. On the road, whole other story. But I do think that, again, this is a very large number. The number is 30.5, 31, wherever you shop. I'm going to take Texas. I think this is one of those same thing as I said before. I think the frustrations of a 4-5 season is going to show, and they are going to pour it on, as they say. So I'm going to take Texas, but more or less I'm going against Kansas because it's been extremely lucrative this year. The last game is very interesting. It's TCU at Oklahoma State. Now, TCU has this aura around it, as it should. It's very justified. 7 of the last 10 years they've beaten Texas, and that's just phenomenal when you say that out loud. But this year, this is a different TCU team. They're 4-5 straight up. They're 2-6-1 against the spread. Oklahoma State is 8-1 straight up, 7-2 against the spread, but they're 7-0 in their last 7 games against the spread. I believe they won a nail biter against Tulsa. And since then, they won 28-23 against Tulsa. Against the Smurf Turfers the week after that, they were a 3-point dog. They won and they covered, obviously. And they have covered every single game ever since, including last week demolishing West Virginia in Morgantown 24-3. I also think TCU, they may have won their Super Bowl last week when they traveled to Baylor and they won, or maybe they're at home. I don't know. Either way, they beat Baylor. And to beat a ranked team like that is very important for a program right now in TCU. And so maybe they're on a high. And maybe coming down to going to Oklahoma State, going to Stillwater, really kind of brings them down to earth. The last 3 times that these teams have played, TCU has kept it close. They actually have a winning record. However, I just don't see TCU being able to keep up with Oklahoma State. I think Oklahoma State is really playing well. Obviously, it's 7-0 against the spread their last seven games. So I'm going with Oklahoma State, and I feel pretty damn good about it. So those are six very random games that I chose. I know they were not in chronological order in terms of the time that they kicked off, but some people have asked, and so there you go. There's a 6-pack. Put it out there right now. I'm sitting at 51% this year. So if I don't get 6 out of 6, my apologies. I'm sure you would have gotten 6 out of 6 if it weren't for me. Either way, thank you for joining me on the first edition of a Football Friday episode. Good luck with your bets this weekend.